Alright, just a couple things as we get started. First, just so you're aware of this, as Travis had asked. No, and I'm not picking on Travis, even though he may think I am. I'm not trying to, at least. But I did go out under the 145 Java 2 Fall 14, and there's now a folder out there under the in-class folder that's called Java Thermometer Applet. And it's got both of the files in there. Alright, in other words, it's got both the thermometer.java and the thermopanel.java files. They're both in there. Alright. As you know, we've had lots of trouble getting this stuff in Android to work. The good news is, if it's not going to work, I wanted it to not work this semester as opposed to next semester when it's a whole class on this. So if it took a couple weeks or whatever to get it resolved, then so be it, because you still had Java to work on, or at least many of you still had Java to work on. All right, as of last weekend, I was all caught up on grading everything except Java. So I am going to try to grade the Java stuff this weekend. And for the first year students, their JavaScript assignment was due this week, and so was their website development. So, all right. Now, since we had problems, Adrian came down here, Adrian Sanchez, one of the people in IT, he came down here, and we were talking about the problems, and I was able to show him a bunch of the problems that we had. So this is what he came up with. So this is what I'd like all of you to please do. All right, so once you're in Eclipse, okay, this shouldn't matter. This shouldn't matter whether you've got a project up or not. All right, so don't worry about that right now. The other good news is we got the emulator to work, and in the past, what we had to do last year is you had to start up the emulator and then you had to stop it. We don't have to stop it now. You know, you can just keep it running. That's good. All right, so I'm looking at all these things as being positives. All right, so the first thing I'd like you to do is go to Window and go down all the way to the bottom and go to Preferences. And that'll bring you out to here. All right, then under here, I'd like you to go to Android. And under Android, I'd like you to choose DDMS. All right, did I do that too fast? That should bring you right here. Okay, I've already got these settings. Yours may or may not look the same. My guess is yours doesn't look anything like this. Yours probably looks like, yours there might say something like 500 or 5,000 probably. All right, what that means is wait 5 seconds and then time out. The problem is that's what it's doing, is it's waiting 5 seconds basically for this connection to take place, and it's not happening. So by changing it to 1,000,000, what you're basically telling it to do is to wait 16 plus minutes. 960,000 milliseconds would be 16 minutes. 1,020,000 milliseconds would be 17 minutes. So it's somewhere between 16 and 17 minutes. So as far as I remember, and I'm going to go back and look just to be sure, but 8600 for save to disk 20 and 1,000,000 in error. I think that's now what I have. All right, so please make sure that that's what your settings are set to. And again, this is the big one. And ADB is Android Developers something or other. Debug Bridge, okay. And what had been happening, at least on my machine, is it had been timing out, waiting for everything to load. And that shouldn't happen anymore. All right. I even asked Adrian, I said, so what do we do if this doesn't work? Do I up it from 1,000,000 to 100,000,000? And he just kind of laughed. All right. We're going to let you catch up. I don't want to go on until we're all here. What's that? He's been MIA all week. He's been MIA all month. And last month. Those are your comments. Those weren't mine. I've said this before, that, you know, you're all welcome to put me down as a reference. There is a form I think you're supposed to fill out now over in Student Services. Okay, but the thing is, once you do that, what I am told is, okay, you've asked me, I've agreed, you fill out that form, you signed it, now any question they ask me is fair game. So if they say, if student X, how was their attendance? And I say, geez, I don't know, I never saw them. All right, I mean, I wouldn't put it like that, but I'm also not going to lie that if somebody is not here, I'm not going to say, oh, it was great. That's not fair. No, I said, I think that you can do it at any time. Just, they may not even require one anymore. It used to, for a while it was a form, then it was a brownish gray index card, and it looked like a turd, the color of a turd if it had been laying around for a long time. And then they moved it back, I think, to a form. All right, you're all wondering, how would I know what that color would be? It's just what I'm imagining it would be. All right? All right. Yeah, it's all been recorded. Yeah, it's all recorded for posterity's sake, you know. That way, if I'm ever out interviewing for jobs and I give them my YouTube channel, they'll be listening to this and they'll go, geez, we wouldn't want this loser. All right. So what you were supposed to do was start up Eclipse, go to Window. On the bottom of Window, by the Window menu on the top, the bottom thing that's there is Preferences. Choose Preferences. Then open up Android, and under Android, open up DDMS, and have your settings like this. This is saying to wait before, and thanks to John, yeah, it's the Android debugger, whatever it is, debug, workbench, whatever, I don't care. But 6, it's 1 million. We're telling it to wait 16 minutes plus before it times out. All right, so everybody's got this, correct? Good. All right. Then what he suggested was a couple things. Now, I'm going to read these to you, and I'd like it, I'll post this at the end of the period, but I wanted us to do it together, because if you try doing it yourself, you know, and you screwed something up, I'd have to get him down here again. I really didn't want to do that if I could help it. It says, before creating a new Android virtual device, check this path to see if you have any emulators that are using up unnecessary disk space. I'm going to show you what that is in just a minute. All right? And I'll show you how to get there, because this might be something that after a while when we're working, if you're like, the system is unbelievably slow, or it's not working, or it's whatever, you might want to go in and look at this. All right? And what we do, again, mine will be J. Scott, but yours will be the same thing, but it'll be your login rather than the login that I'm showing, okay? So, double click on computer. Again, we're in the virtual desktop. And here, if you look up on the screen here, this was the problem I was having. That every time I would start up an emulator, it was just adding to the size of my emulator file. And this, which needs at least a gig typically to run, mine was down under half of a meg. And that's why I wasn't getting anything done. All right? So, under My Computer or Computer, double click on the D drive. And yours may or may not look exactly like mine. It's not that big a thing one way or the other. If you don't have personality and personality.back, I don't know. Don't really care. But under the D drive, hopefully you do have your login under there. All right? J. Wanda, T. Deroni, etc. So, double click on that one that's got users on it, and then you'll see your login. Double click on that. The first one that's there that right now that the mouse is resting on is .android. So double click on there. There's 2 folders in here, and the first one says AVD. Double click on there. What this has is that's all the information you currently have right now. That's the information that you currently have right now for your emulators. Okay? Now, if you look here, you might have 2 different ones. It doesn't matter. It's not going to hurt anything because we're going to remove all of it in a minute anyway. All right? I'm still not exactly positive why when you're doing this, I'm telling it to launch and I'm telling it to wipe user data. And I thought it would be, but it's still making a copy and keeping both copies. Don't know why. I don't know enough about it, and it's okay. But the point is, if you look right now, if you are right here, again, yours may or may not look like this, and it doesn't matter really if yours does or not. But if we want to start with a brand new clean slate, so I'm just going to highlight everything that's in here. I'm going to hit delete and tell it to go goodbye. And are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. So now that thing's empty. When we go back in just a minute, when we go back to the actual emulator itself, the emulators will still be there. But all of the settings for them have been removed. So the first thing we'll do is to delete any emulators that you have. All right, we'll do that in just a minute. Did I go too fast? Did anybody miss anything? All right. Again, ideally, this is going to work for everybody, and ideally, we'll never have to do this again. All right, that's really, I'm being serious. That's what I hope for. And I see Mike's gone, and again, Zach's gone, and Zane's gone. If I have to work with them individually next week to do this, that's fine. All right, or I can just tell them to watch the tape or whatever. All right, so now I'm just going to minimize this. I might want to look at it later, so I'm just going to minimize it. I'm going to go back into Eclipse. Not that way, because I'm trying to start up another session of Eclipse. So, okay, cancel. Okay. So I want to go back into Eclipse. So on this handout that he gave us, that was this. Does that make sense to everybody? Again, I'm going to put this handout out there. And as I said earlier, the reason I didn't put it out there earlier is, gee, Jeff, I tried this on my own and it didn't work. I figured if we did it all as a class, even if it took a half an hour, then we're doing it once, and hopefully we never have to do it again, like I said. All right. So he said, if your Android device has not been working, I would suggest deleting anything that's in that folder. Well, we removed everything. So what we're going to do is this. Now, before you do this, one thing that I did, and I asked Adrian what he thought, and he didn't say yay or nay, but what I did before I did any of this is I went in, you don't have to do it, but I want to show you what I did. I went into the actual SDK Manager itself, not the emulator manager, but the SDK Manager, this thing. Remember this from the first day? And I basically said, hey, you know what? If you got something in there that isn't installed, by God, just install it. So I just installed everything. Now, do you have to do that? Let's run through the steps and not have you do that. But if you have a problem, then I'd suggest you go back and do the installs. The other thing is, if you do change anything in here, so if you install anything in here, by default, which means unless told otherwise, Android is supposed to restart. But if it doesn't restart, you manually restart it. And you should know by now to manually restart it, you just do a file, restart. That's it. But you should always do that. Even now, we're going to add a new emulator, and I'm going to suggest you do a restart after you add the new emulator. And if you say, what's that? We're going to do that in just a second. All right? But people, you know, because I've said this, and people, well, why do we have to do the restart? Because you want to make sure all the changes are being written out to whatever files that are in there in the background, and that's supposed to do it. All right? So, like I said, if you do have a problem after we go through all this, I'd suggest going back in there and adding all that stuff. All right? So now I'm going to go into the actual Virtual Device Manager. And probably, there are not probably two people in here whose device manager looks identical when you open this up. All right? So what I'm going to do is, if you have anything here, like I'm just going to grab that one, highlight it, and I'm going to click Delete. It says, are you sure? Yes, I am. And that's what I want yours to look like. So if you've got any emulators, please select them and hit Delete so they're gone. Isn't it fun when we have class project days like this? You're all thinking, what a smart ass. And I'm thinking, yeah, but I don't like doing this any more than you like hearing it. But like I said, if we do it and get it all done once, that's good. Then it's worthwhile. All right. So these are the suggestions that Adrian has made. All right. So what I'm going to do is grab this. Everything that he's got here. Oops. No, that's what it should look like. That's even better. So I'll leave that up there for a second. So when you're in the emulator manager, all right, click the Create button, and that should bring your screen up to this, right? Once it comes up and it looks like that, then please put in the settings as you see them here. You don't have to necessarily call it Nexus 1. Whatever you call it right here, if you look where my mouse is, you can't have any blank spaces in the name. But if you don't really like Nexus 1, then call it something else. Yeah? That's all you have in there? See, this is what I told him. And I said that we're going to have different people with different things in there. And I said, according to Terry, he built this all off of the same virtual desktop that he set up for me. And some of you have got stuff I don't have. I don't know. Now, but look, and this is for you too. Because what he said here was, if this is not an option, you will have to install the SDK for this emulator to show up in the list. Go to Android, Sdk Manager, scroll down until you see this to see whether or not it's installed. If it's not installed, highlight that and the 5 things underneath it. Now, John's gotten his to work, and to my knowledge, he uses API 19. All right? But this is what Adrian and I were working with yesterday, and it worked. So I'll give you a second. It sounds like at least a couple of you. How many people have this in there, the Android 4.4 with the W2? How many people don't have it in there as an option? All right, then why don't you go back and try to do this? Then install it, please. Hopefully it won't take long. The other day when we did those installs, you had, some of you had 50, 60 things you were installing. I think I had like 73 the first time I did this. Remember how long that took? Basically, it was we blew a whole period just installing stuff. Well, that's why I said, if you really want to bad enough, then just install everything that's not installed right now. That should pretty much make sure that you've got everything handled. The recommendation from Android too, if you all hear this, the recommendation from Android is that you check this SDK Manager frequently, because whenever they find problems, they tend to try to push fixes up. All right. The other thing, just so you all know, because this is going to be, as of right now at least, this will be part of Jeff's summer plans. I may do it for the new people, but I don't think that we're going to be able to. Have you all heard of Android Studio? Android Studio, okay, first of all, do you know who owns Android? Google. And Android Studio is the editor that Google made to work with Android. They even have, if you remember, I gave you that series of articles a week or two ago from that Ray Wenderlich, and there were 3 Android articles. The whole first one is on installing Android Studio and using that. So you say, well, that sounds good. Then why don't we do that? Because when you do that, there's a bunch of internal settings that you have to set. And if you get them wrong, nothing will work. And if you get them wrong and attempt to set them back to the way they were for Eclipse, you have no guarantee that that will work. And I'm like, I don't want to blow off the last 5 weeks and say, hey, it's all lab. I know you maybe wouldn't mind that, but I would. All right? So have you all found this? Like I said, if you want to, just install everything. That's your call. If we go through this and you have problems with anything, I'd suggest then you go back to the Android SDK Manager and just install everything. Did it take long? Is it still installing? Okay. Now, ideally, when you get done, and I'll put this up there just so those whose works already. All right, the AVD name, again, is something that you create. All right, there are different devices. This is the device historically we've used, the Nexus 1 there. And if you look for the target, then hopefully after you do the install, you'll have Android 4.4 W.2 API level 20. If you look up here, this is the only way I've ever gotten this to work. And John, if yours has worked in another way, please let me know. But Here I've had to always say Android Wear ARM. When I tried using Google, I tried doing it just to see how it would work, and it didn't work. Yeah. Yeah. If you look up on the screen here, almost always for what we do, you will not want this checkbox checked. What we want is when we run our app, we want a keyboard to come up, what's called a soft keyboard, so it's part of the application. All right? Because that's more reminiscent of a real device. Okay, so we'll put that there. You have to have something set up for the skin. You have to do that. So you have to click the down arrow and choose no skin. This should be a default for the back camera, none. That should be a default for the RAM 512. That should be a default for the VM Heap 32. That should be a default 200 meg for the internal storage. And you should be able to leave the SD card blank. Now the other day, if you remember, I left it blank and I was getting that error. And Mike Lemon Googled it and said that was a problem with the SD card. Got it to work yesterday with nothing put in there for that SD card. Everything was cool. So my hope is once we set this emulator up, if later, let's say that Travis decides, you know, this is fine, but I'd also like to put an emulator up there because I've got my tablet right here, and I'd like to have an emulator so that would be basically like a 10-inch type of thing, so I could see how it would look on a tablet. All I'm going to suggest is if you do that, the only thing that you change in here is the name and the device, but you keep everything else the same as this one is right here. All right? And if you tell me, well, I didn't and mine still works, okay. But these are my suggestions. Okay. Still downloading? Yeah, it may be that you have to do a restart of Eclipse before that'll show. If you think you've got everything installed, just close out the Sdk Manager, which should, if you're back into Eclipse, do a file restart. And in case you were wondering, Andrew, yep, we normally do have this much fun in here. Well, ideally, next year, we're not going to have these problems. I mean, the stuff will be set up. When John took the class, John's a lab assistant in this room, but when he took the class last spring, we didn't have problems. I mean, the first day or so, we had a few things that were quirky, but after that, we never had a problem with this, other than the fact that the emulator is slow as hell. No. My jokes? No, people just don't get those. All right? Yeah. My kids always ask, why do you laugh at your own jokes, Dad? And I just say, so someone will. All right? And it's one of those things, I wish I had a nickel every time when I was with Doug, and he would say to me, yeah, somebody told me the other day that you were a wit. And I told them they were half right. How many times that guy said that to me? Still installing? Okay. Like I said, just in case anybody has problems or it takes a long time or whatever, I will take this handout that he gave and I will put it out there. I mean, if you're interested, I can make a hard copy for everyone. I can do that. I don't have a problem doing that. So if any of you ever see Zane or Mike or Zach you might want to tell them if they are planning on coming to class next Tuesday that they might want to come an hour early so they can try to set their machines up like this. So as we're moving on, they're not sitting there and trying to do all these updates. Let's just walk through the rest of it. Even if yours isn't installed, like I said, I'll print off a copy of this for everyone. All right? So let's pretend all your stuff has been installed. You go in there and you add the new virtual device. You're able to put all this stuff in there just the way it looks. All right? So it says then open the virtual device manager. So you can do this before you run your program and keep it open. So if you watch, what I'm saying is I'm going to come in here and now I have to create one, I guess. So it's Nexus 1. And it's Nexus 1. All right, the target is there. CPU is here. No hardware keyboard. No skin. Back camera, memory, everything's cool. Okay? Now, I will tell you something. I have tried doing this several times now in the last 2 days, and you saw how I blew away everything that was in that AVD folder. I did it yesterday. I did the exact same thing I just showed you. I blew away everything in the AVD folder. But when I typed in Nexus 1, I had created an emulator earlier that was called Nexus 1. It wouldn't let me use that name, even though it was totally gone. It wasn't in the file, and when you brought up the emulator, this thing here, nothing showed. But it still wouldn't. So there must be some internal file someplace that didn't like that. Now it doesn't appear to have a problem. So I'm going to click OK. All right, so again, we're pretending right now that all your installs have taken place and you're able to do this. So there it is. All right, and you know that to start this, you click on it and you choose Start. Now, on here, the recommendation from Adrian is that you do say, all right, wipe user data. And he's working with me on this yesterday, and I said something to him. I said, did you wipe? And there was a student in here who just kept giving me weird looks and said that was kind of a personal question that I was asking him. And I said, no, it wasn't worth it. So I'm going to keep it there and tell it to launch. It's starting the emulator. The first time you start up a new emulator, this may take a good 15 minutes before you see anything other than a black screen with the emulator on it. All right? Also, if you look up on the screen here, because there have been some questions about this. See this down here? Can you see that on the bottom of the screen? What that says is if over here where I've got the symbol for the AVD, if there was a yellow triangle there instead of that symbol, a yellow triangle with an exclamation point in it, what it would say would be, you set up something wrong, but you can go back in there and fix it. If I had totally hosed it, I'd get the red X, which means that it did not load. All right? But hopefully this is going to load. So I'm going to minimize this, not close it, but minimize it. All right? And sooner or later at least, hopefully it'll show over here. Now, in the past, not now, but in the past, last year, correct me if I'm wrong, John, when we did this, notice that's your emulator running down in the lower left-hand corner. All right? If you notice how this is blackened, last year this stuff would turn gray. You could not actually click on that to run it until you close this. It does not appear as though we have to do that anymore. That's a good thing. Because it's weird, because to use the emulator, you got to start the emulator and then close it to use it. That never made sense to me. I did go ahead and look at it. You bought the Stack Overflow, and people literally, they've got the comments they make about the emulator. It's like, hey, doofus, why use that? It's just a pain. If I had my way, if I had the money, if they'd give me $1,000, literally, if the school would, probably what I'd get would be in addition to those MacBooks, I'd go out and buy 10 tablets, real cheapies, but 10 tablets. All right, and for about $100 a crack, and let everybody use a tablet. Okay, and then we hook those up because it's supposed to work much better than the emulator does. Yes. Now once the emulator starts, it's going to look like this. It's going to look, I don't know what that's doing. Yesterday it didn't do anything, but now it's just glittering away over here. Oh, that's the launch. Oh, all right. But right now, that's the emulator. Don't close it. You might have to let it up there for quite a while. What should happen is within 10 minutes or so, you get a message on it that says it's just about ready, that you can swipe the screen if you want to go on. So you can hold on the mouse and just drag. All right? And then eventually, if you wait long enough, it'll turn orange. Okay? And what used to happen was in that window, John will remember this, I think it was like we had like a circle would come around here, and there'd be a lock. And you'd have to take the lock and drag it on the end of the circle, and that would actually let your program start to run. Not like that anymore. So I'm just going to give this some time, and hopefully at least, it's going to do its thing. All right? Now just to go back though, onto here, as it says, this is what it should look like. It looks kind of weird, but that's what it should look like eventually. Now mine never came up and said, you're all set, swipe it to get started. Great, I never got that. Mine came up and said it was almost ready. If I wanted to swipe, I could. So I did that, I waited about 5 more minutes, and then I just ran my program, and it worked. All right? And that's the whole thing. While we're waiting, so now I'm printing out 10 copies, which are more than we need, but there's a couple people not here today, so you're all going to have a copy of everything that I just talked to you about. again, that makes no sense to me, since we're all supposedly running off the same virtual desktop. Why any of the settings would be different on any of them doesn't make any sense to me. The other thing that Adrian told me yesterday, and I don't think John's heard this either, but that he said one of the main reasons we're having so many problems with this is he's figured out that XAMPP does not play well with Eclipse. Because he doesn't have XAMPP up there, and he said, I'm not waiting at all. He said, my stuff is just like that. And he's like, you want me to get rid of it? No, don't get rid of XAMPP. No, don't get rid of Eclipse. Yeah, if you got XAMPP running, you might want to at least close it down. That might. No, I did it yesterday, and I had XAMPP up and running because I wanted to see if it was slower, but it still worked. I'm going to stop taping, and then after 2 o'clock, hopefully everybody who is still installing something, all right, it will be installed by then.